Greetings. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and throughout our created, uploaded, presented videos, we continually stress that we strive to bring all the real truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, no hype, no fluff, or other silly nonsense. And prior to creating this channel, we created a policy/business policy. Honesty is our best policy, so we strive to stick to that. And we also believe in the old chivalry, where a man's honour is his honour, so he should be honourable and honour it. We are human, so we are prone to making mistakes or errors. But remember Willie Shakespeare, when he said, "To err is human, but to forgive is divine." So we make mistakes, and if someone brings it kindly to our attention, we'll look at it to see if they're actually correct, and then if it is, we'll remedy or rectify our mistake or our error, be it a spelling mistake or some information or whatever like that. We'll look into that, and if you're right, we will give you the rightful acknowledgement and the credit. We'll bring it to our attention. Today, because we have had a lot of comments in our comments about the Maori, the Greeks, the Hebrews, the Chinese, the Irish Celts, etc. were here before the Maori, the Maori, who Te Rapara, an infamous Maori chief who travelled from supposedly the North Island, top of the North Island, down to the south, gobbled them up for dinner as he was a cannibal all the way down. The nation of New Zealand, or Aotearoa. People say, oh no, it's only the Maori that were here first, nobody else was here before them. But then that can't be true if there was the people, Maori or whatever, historians, whatever, saying there was the Maori, there was the pygmy or small people, fairy people, I think that's mythical though, and so forth before they were here. The Maori came here, right? Or when they came to Aotearoa or New Zealand, they discovered that there were other people here, like the Maori, those pygmies, etc., etc. Okay. Others trying to tell us that Moses was Maui, who's supposed to be a mythical figure, according to legend, Maori legend, etc., etc., which does come from other sources, possibly from the Pacific Islands like Rarotonga, chiefly, etc., the Mangaian, in the Mangaian language, the Polynesian, Melanesian, goes right back. And they say, oh, they had many origins, but they didn't have one origin. Well, that's a load of rubbish, because every people has an origin. Okay? And then they merge with others, so they become many different people. They become a mix-up, right? And then they migrate, they spread out to warmer climates, all that sort of stuff, and they possibly adopt and then adapt to the culture, the traditions, the religious belief system, whatever, of those people already inhabiting that island, region, geographical region, whatever, right? Yeah, so we are re-looking at this book by self-claimed historian. He wasn't actually a recognised historian by those who have the qualifications, etc., the real historians, who say, no, he wasn't an official historian, he was just one who was interested in the histories, Egyptian, etc. He self-proclaimed himself a historian, thought of himself as one, and he was actually of the Theosophical Society, as are or were H.P. Blavatsky, possibly Manly P. Hall, Krishnamurti, who Bruce Lee was influenced by, the legendary martial artist. He's the Indian guy that sits on a chair and quietly gives the philosophies of life. Yeah? There's two Krishnamurtis, but this one was like the English educated speaking guru you might find on YouTube. Anyway, so we're looking at this book by Gerald Massey, who translated a lot of the Egyptian texts, etc., did a lot of books, and this book is called The Book of Beginnings, Volume 2, and it has section 21, comparative vocabulary of Maori and Egyptian words. Okay, it's in relation to Akkadian-Hebrew, not Palestinian Hebrew or Akkadian Hebrew. Okay, because the Egyptians might have had roots in the Assyrian, from the Assyrians, etc., etc. So there's a comparison of, well, he did this in around about 1881, something like that. He don't think he actually knew the language, but he got some sort of dictionary from somebody else and used that as a reference. So here's a lot of the Maori words like ae, ae, which means yes. In the Egyptian, it looks like it's ia or ia, yes, certainly. Yeah, very similar, and that's why Gerald Massey says, look, it's the closest. Looks like it's the closest language to the ancient Egyptian or Kemet language, right? Okay, and it's quite extensive. You may have a Akkadian Egyptian vocabulary section as well, but that's not what we're interested in, where our interest lies. And then he has section 22, African origins, and this he spelt it in those 1800 days. Yeah, notice we would without the E. African origins of the Maori. The vocabulary appears to reverse the dictum of those philologists who continually assert that phonetic decay and the consequent obliteration of the origins of language is especially active amongst the primitive races who are now in the lowest stages of culture or of survival. These words were taken down by Europeans who knew nothing of Egyptian. They didn't know that language. They got it from the natives who were in possession of no written characters. It's like the Maori language. Originally, they had a language they spoke, but they didn't have a writing system, so they didn't write it down. So when the European came, certain Europeans took a certain leader of a tribe or chief and maybe a couple of others to England, and then they helped them to build a writing system, and that's what we have today, right? The written Maori, right, or te reo. Okay, so for unknown ages past, the words have lived in memory alone, or rather they have remained like mummies, so carefully preserved that the likeness to life is as recognisable as ever. Okay, this is Gerald Massey talking here, not us. This is his statement. So far from the principle of laziness, or at least effort, having got the better of the Maori in their ethnical decadence, they have sedulously sounded to the last the most difficult phonetics, such as the ng, because that's ng as in sing. If you learn the Maori language, it'll tell you, as in the word the ng, or ing as in the word sing, and still possess 1/3 more words beginning with the K sound in addition to ing than with the H. The following lists show how the K sound has been continued to words found in Egyptian in the modified form. So you probably could call that Neo-Egyptian. Okay, we did have a Rarotongan female friend and came across other Rarotongan or Cook Island speaking Maori, right? And they said, if you want to learn the language, probably get the accent right, etc., learn from us, because we're basically the cousin language. Okay, the Rarotongans, the closest to the Maori language, right? It's like when I was learning German, the stepfather being English born, right, says, help me with pronunciation, saying it right, okay, because they're cousins, apparently, the Germans and the British. So it was even suggested in the book that I was learning German from, go find an Englishman, because they have that exact accent, right, and pronunciation of those words. They're the best ones to learn from, so I did that. Okay, but now my German is very rusty. Yeah, I can read some properly, other times I can't. I just don't practice it enough to say, and that's what happens. Okay, so he has the Maori and the Egyptian. Okay, comparisons. In Egypt, language continued to grow, although very slowly, and assumed new forms as a young life shoots sloughed off with the old dead leaves, and he carries on. Okay, it's not really relative to what we're getting at, or we can find, get at. And he puts here, language is tenfold less worn down in Maori. Duplicating the word was the earliest mode of pluralizing it and extending the sense by adding a second, third, or fourth to the first. The principles is especially illustrated in the interjectional domain of words, and the most primitive languages are those which retain most reduplication. And he goes on a bit, and he goes on about this chart and this stuff here. Okay, he says here about the table here. The table proves that the Negroid language of Bruma Island retains the highest number of duplicated words, and next to it comes the Maori of New Zealand with its 169 in the 1,000. And the following list of Maori words will show how the duplication of the syllable pluralizes and intensifies. Okay, shows it here. Apo, gather together, grasp, up, gapo, roll together, entangle, etc., etc. In this aspect, the language of the Maori is next to the Negroid type, and both belong to the oldest formation of spoken language. Egyptian had, to a great extent, passed out of this primitive phase, but the hieroglyphics remain, and these in the ideographic stage show us the picture of duplication, inasmuch as the phonetic B was an ideographic boo-boo or bob, F was faff, etc., etc. In tracing the African origins at the antipodes, the Maori language and Mangaian mythology will furnish the chief evidence, but no contribution from kindred sources will be rejected. And he carries on. Okay, goes into it. Okay, it's not really what we're trying to get at, but it might be useful information in some way. There's a hell of a lot of it. What is this? The eel god? What's that? Okay. We put here, Tune is the Maori name of the eel. I thought it was tuna. Sometimes they make mistakes here, I'm sure of it. And the word eel is identical with El and A, the son who made the passage of the underworld, as the Af son or Atun. So this El here is in the Hebrew. Okay, Elohim. This is a Canaanite word. Before Abraham went there, they were using this word. They probably adopted and adapted it, which apparently, according to native-born Aramaic-speaking translator Victor N. Alexander, this L was scribed wrong. It should be El, E-I-L, the name of God. Okay, where Christ was crucified on the cross, he cried out in ancient Galilean Aramaic, because that's what he spoke, El, El, Lamana Shukthani, which is Galilean Aramaic. It's not Hebrew. Probably there's similarities, right? You could say in the Hebrew Elohim, Eloi, whatever, right? Okay, because it's sister languages, but this originally was a Canaanite word for a pagan god. You go and Google it, and that's what you'll find. Okay, so the word El is identical with El, and A, the son who made the passage of the underworld, as the Af Sun or Atun. Right? This is all Egyptian. In the story of Ina, who had a divine lover, daughter of Kui the blind, who dwelt in the shadow of the cave of Tauta, Tuna, the eel god, appears to her and tells her of the coming flood and of an eel that will be landed at her threshold. She is instructed to chop off its head and bury it. This was done, and Ina daily visited the grave of the eel god, her lover. Okay. So yeah, it's not Tune, e. Over here it should be tuna. Pretty sure of that. Unless that's the really old original ancient word, and somewhere along the way it's been changed to an A. Okay, one day she saw a stout green shoot piercing the soil, and next day this had divided into two, and so forth, so forth. Okay, there's nothing really relative here that we want to look at or take note of. There's more mentioning of the Maori and so forth. Okay, what's this? Tat signifies to establish and found, as was done in crossing and fulfilling the circle, or in tatting. So that might be an Egyptian word or something. Tatanan, tatting the figures of creation over and over again, enacting scenes set forth by mythology. The first who tatted, however, and the earliest to cross the waters was the great mother herself, and the water types of the hippopotamus and the crocodile. Yeah, it's all looks like it's all Egyptian. What's this? The Maori also have their tatting in the game of cat's cradle, because that's what it's supposed to mean. Cat's cradle, called Maui. Well, this is what this is supposed to mean, right? This, by the by, is the name of the cat in Egyptian. In their Maui, they were accustomed to represent such scenes from their mythology as the Great Mother, bringing forth her primal progeny, Maui fishing up the land, and other pictures of the beginnings in the forms assumed by the crossed or tatted lines. Te Ika a Maui, page 347. It's a reference. They were repeating the work of Tatanan, tatting the figures of creation over and again and enacting the scenes set forth by mythology. The first who tatted, however, and the earliest to cross the waters was the Great Mother herself and her water types of the hippopotamus. There it is again. They revered the hippopotamus because it lived in the water. Water is life, and it brought forth life, baby hippopotami. And the crocodile, who they revered as well. Okay. Her tat sign was simply a tie or knot. In her second character as Hathor, it's another Egyptian god. She is styled Me-urt, the great or peaceful fulfiller. Me denotes a number, etc., etc. Mau in Maori means restrained, confined, to be fixed and established, which was illustrated by the Maui or cat's cradle as a mode of typology. And he carries on. Still nothing really relative there. Just thought we'd look at that. Okay, as the Mangaians, with their Mangaian language, it's like there's an island in the Cook Islands called Mangaia, etc., etc. And Maori have the sun god Ra. There can be no doubt they had him in the character or under the type of Kipara. One shape of Kipara was Ta. Never say the P. It's Ta, the crooked-legged lame god, and in Maori, one name of the lame-footed and the crippled is Kōpiri. Kōpiri. Also, blah 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 blah. Western dialect, and so forth. And here's some sort of ritual circumcision. The Maoris made use of a sacred instrument called a whittle, as rendered by Angus. Angus, volume 2, paragraph 260 to 224. Okay, still not really relevant. We're just like looking at where they mention these kind of things about Maui, etc., and the Maori. Okay, nothing there. What's this? Okay. Because it says here African origins of the Maori, we try to find some information. Did they actually originate from there? Because we've been told, yeah, they were of many places, but they didn't come from one origin or one place. Well, that's completely bogus. Okay. because if they originated from a certain place, as tribes or nations history proves did, then they become many, okay? Because everything has an origin. It's just the name for tattooing or internizing is also applied to the desiccating and preserving of the human head. Remember the Maori shrunken heads and etc. that they got back from probably the English British Museum. Okay, they were brought back home. The Maoris, well, it shouldn't be the Maoris, it should be the Maori because there's no S. You can't add an S to the end of that, right? Made a moko or embalmed mummy of Captain Lloyd's head, whoever that guy was. This they turned into a Christ or Karast, it's Egyptian, the Pepu Christo, the risen dead, and consulted it as an oracle, a mouthpiece of the other world. So the spirits on the other side spoke to those. So a wild tribe on the east of the Republic of Ecuador are or were in the habit of making the mummy Christ by cutting off the heads of the enemies and removing the skin and scalp from the skull entirely, etc., etc. The Maoris, should be the Maori, have a ceremony called the Whangai Ho, rendered feedwind by short land. Somebody in their book there, New Zealand Taylor P.147 note, and it carries on from there. The Ankh Egyptians to make a covenant. The Whangai Ho is performed over those who slay an enemy in battle, and some of the hair and ear of the first man killed form a part of the offering. The ear is eaten by the female ariki. We've always been led to believe that's talking about Christ. That's a Maori name for Christ. Here it's ariki, a pagan goddess or a chieftainess. The ear eaten at the whangai is the ankh in Egyptian, a symbol of the covenant, also called the ankh, an emblem of life. Hieroglyphically, the ear ankh is equivalent to the ankh as the crux and sata, and eating the ear was identical with the covenant made on the cross, etc., etc. It goes on more about the Maori. What's this? Atua, in accordance with Sut or Art, being the first divinity, as a hero in the dark and an outward image of the mental darkness. Atua, it's Maori, also means the first. Okay, not too sure now. Not that well versed in the Te Reo or the Maori language. Someone out there might know about that. Okay, need some more here. By degrees we shall discover certain test types of the unity of origin and mythology. One of these is that of the 8 gods, the Semen of Egypt and Assyria, which have been identified with the Hebrew Elohim. See, people got to understand that this is the Hebrew Elohim, which has a different meaning. It's like this. Yeah. Originally, the original ancient, very old Aramaic, Assyrian Aramaic or Aramaic, was the sister language, the older sister language of the original ancient, very old Tab Ivri, or the Hebrew. Okay, they had similar words. They had the same words with the same meanings way back thousands of years ago. But later on, when it was modified, the Hebrew was modified, perhaps by the Massey, etc., where they added vowels, because the Aramaic only had A. Okay, the rest were consonants, but the A we think as a vowel was actually considered a consonant. Okay, so with that modernization, that Elohim in that Hebrew means something like the ones, or of the gods, or whatever, right? The gods. Okay. Whereas the Aramaic Elohim, Elohim, has a different meaning. Okay, a very different meaning. It's to do with the winged this icon, etc., etc. Okay. And Arthur and his 7 companions in Britain. That's King Arthur. It has been mentioned that Cornish children used to figure the city of Troy by cutting 7 circles around the centre, blah blah blah. Okay. This Troy is Egyptian Terui, as a form of Sesanu, etc., etc. Okay. So we'll go back up here. Talk about the Hakari fish etc., etc. And a similarity in the Maori language. Okay. Yeah, we still can't find where it's actually telling us that the Maori originated from Egypt, as it seems to hint. Okay. It's probably saying more in relationship with the Acadia or Akkadian Hebrew and the Egyptian. Okay, there's a lot of information here. Okay, someone will probably have to get hold of this and read it. We're not going to spend all day reading all of it, right? The Fijian Tangawalu, or maybe Tangavalu, not really sure how they say that. We'll just go Tangawalu. Samoan will probably be Tangavalu if that's a word in Samoan, but we'll just go Tangawalu. Or assembly of 8 represents the 8 gods who ruled in Smen, the ancient star gods of chaos, before the firmament of Ra, the sun god, was lifted by Shu, or Maui, or Tat, became the manifestor of the 8th in the latter lunar solar phase. In another form, the primordial 8 were personified as the father and the 7 sons, who were the 7 sailors as the Kabari, the 7 Pato Koi of Phoenicia, the 7 Hogetes of California, or Hogates, and the 7 Nemu or Pygmy sons of Ta, who stand by his side as builders. In the Manganian mythology, Pinga has 7 clever sons who are all pygmies, their appellative being the 7 dwarf sons of Pinga. The equivalent of this name in Maori is Pinaku. Did he say? A war canoe. English Pinas. Not really sure. Is it Pinas or Pinak? The same vessel that is called blah 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 blah. Yeah. And a lot more information here. Just going through it. Nothing really we want to make note of there. But apparently Maui, the mythical Maui, his ropes were made of coconut. It says in here somewhere. Yeah, it's got something here. Mano or Mano Maori is the inner part, and the Mano is the duplicate, which makes it an equivalent for the Menti Egyptian, and blah blah blah. Okay, still not relative to what we're trying to get at. Okay, now they're saying the kava of ava, an intoxicating drink. Kawa in New Zealand is the strong drink. Kava, Rarotonga and Mangaia, that would be the Cook Islands. Ava in Samoa, ava in Tahiti and Hawaii. Yeah, if you've ever had kava, it's a murky looking muddy drink that they make out of the kava root or something like that, and it's very potent. 12 glasses and you're off your rocker. Okay, you're invincible. Yeah, we tried that when we were at school, and that's what it basically did. Okay, and more information. Okay, we're trying to find this one on Maui. It has been shown that the name of Shu is also written Mau, and the earlier Egyptologists read his name as Maui. This is the name under which he reappears in the Polynesian mythology. So that's probably where you got your Egyptian roots. Okay, your Maori are of the Egyptians. Okay, you probably were the Egyptians at some stage. Okay, that's what we're looking at. That's what we're finding. Not Hebrews, not Hebrew Israelite or Israelite slaves in Egypt. Okay, who left when the Exodus happened, the liberation, right? Okay, it's clearly saying here, Maui from the Egyptian, which he reappears in the Polynesian mythology. So they say, oh no, we've got no Egyptian origins. That just blew you away, blew your claim away. Also, the Ruti twin lines are there represented as Ru, the father, and Maui, his son. These are likewise the founders of the heavenly abode, as in the ritual. The legend of the sky raised tells how the heavens at one time almost touched the earth. Is that Rangi and Papa in the old myth? and Maui resolved to raise the sky, for which purposes he obtained the assistance of Ru. Maui stood at the north and Ru took up his position in the south. These two lay prostrate on the ground and succeeded in raising the solid blue with their backs, and then they rose to their knees. Next they stood upright and lifted it with the palms of their hands and tips of their fingers. Then they drew out their own bodies to vast proportions and pushed up the retreating heavens to their present position. The solid blue answering to the Egyptian lapis lazuli, that was Assyrian. It was something that they used for ornaments, etc. Wristbands and all that sort of stuff, necklaces. And the bar or steel was then pared and polished until perfectly smooth and lustrous as we see it now. Some reference there. Gerald, page 71. This is the likeness of the lion gods on the horizon, sustaining heaven and not letting it fall, or the twin lions who support the sun on their backs at the equinox. Shu, who lifts the heavens, or sun and keeps itself with gate, blah blah blah. Yeah. So that's in relation to the Maori Ra, word Ra, the sun god. Okay. What's this? The missionaries have acquired the images without the ideas which they once embodied. For example, this island bears the Maori name for a book, puka puka, which they tell us is a duplicate of the English word book. Okay. Yet it is a native name that retains a more subtle sense than is conveyed by the word book. Puka puka has the meaning of communicating secretly and without speaking, which is effected by the book. This goes back to puka or huka, Egyptian for thought and magic, puka and huka being synonymous, one and the same probably. Amongst the Tongans, Maui is still a kind of Atlas in the netherworld, the domain of Anha, where he supports the earth on his prostrate body. Okay, yeah, that's the symbol of Atlas, isn't it? When there is an earthquake, they say it is Maui trying to turn over for relief, and the world bearer or heaven supporter is invoked, and the earth is beaten to make him lie still beneath his burden. Here the character of Maui is merged in that of Ru, whose name in Maori denotes the earthquake, and to shake. This may serve to connect the bones of Ru, pumice stone, with volcanic action by which they were ejected from the earth. Moreover, earthquake is caused by force from below, and Maori sign as Anha is the rump of the lioness, which signifies force, and so forth. The footprint or footprints stamped in the earth by Maui when he raised up the heavens are shown in various of the Polynesian islands. In one of the legends, the work of Maui is assigned to Tane, who divides the heaven from the earth, and Tan, Egyptian, signifies the dividing, separating in two halves. In another, the raising of the sky is assigned to Te, and in Samoa they also show two hollow places in a rock, nearly 2 yards each in length, as footprints of Te, which mark the spot where he stood when he pushed up the heaven from the earth. And there's some reference there. Sources. Okay. These then are identified with Maushu in the ritual and with Maui in Polynesia. Okay. More information. Now it's comparing it to Hindu mythology. We find that in the Maori myth that when Maui has secured the sun in his 6 nooses, which represent 6 months, or 1/2 the circle of the year, from solstice to solstice, the sun slackens in its course, and weak with wounds crawls slowly towards the underworld. In his anguish he cries, "Why should you wish to kill Tama Nui Te Ra?" by which they learned the sun's second name. According to Gray, page 38. I don't know if that's Governor Gray or somebody else. Don't think it'd be Earl Grey, because it's the name of a tea, type of tea. Okay, where are we? Tama Nui Te Ra is the Ra in his character of the great Nui, firstborn Tama, the equivalent of Tum, who is Ra in his first sovereignty. It was Tum who passed through the 6 lower signs and was represented as sinking from the land of life. Ra's second name is Tama, which word in Egyptian means the second, to renew, renovate, make over again. In the Egyptian mythology, Taui is the wife of Ra, and so forth, so forth. Okay, so it looks like it's all originating from Egypt. So Maori might be of Egyptian descent. Okay. And looking for more stuff here. It goes on about Maui. The legend of the tree which opened the eyes of those who ate of its fruit is preserved in Mangaya. It's that Mangayan language, Cook Island related, and a form identified more ancient and primitive than in the Hebrew mythos. From the so-called exploits of Maui, we learn that the great mother, called the grandmother of Maui, dwells in the darkness of the underworld. Here she is known as Ina the Blind, who in her groping blindness tends a few sparks of fire with which she is unable to cook her food. Okay. So it's going way back before the Maori, and probably Polynesian, Mangayan, or even further back, Egyptian, etc., etc. Somewhere along the way, it looks like they've adopted and adapted it to their myths that they tell everybody today. Yeah, it goes way back by the look of it, before the so-called Maori, right, who were given that name by the European. More mythical stuff. The name of Shu, written with the feather, is paralleled in the Maori myth by the pigeon type of Maui, in the form of which he makes his aerial voyages. When Maui made his transformation into the pigeon, he took the name of Rupe. It was in the form of the pigeon, etc., etc. A rude representation of Shu as the support of the sun god when he resolves to be lifted up is also perceivable in the Maori myth. Maui ascends to the place of his father, who is here called Rehua. Rehu in Maori denotes the setting sun, i.e., or for example, Tum in Egypt, the primordial Ra, the sun god. He begins to set the old god's house to the rights. Its age, Rehua was too feeble to do this for himself. Amongst other of Rupe's performances is the arranging of a cross beam, by which we may understand an image of the balance or equinox. This is said to have been so indifferently done that Kai Tangata, another son of Rehua, was one day killed through hanging on the crossbeam, which gave way, and he was dashed down. His blood ran over that part of the heavens, etc., etc. The transformation of Maui is depicted as his death. At the end of his career or journey, he comes to the dwelling of his ancestress, Hine Nui Te Po, or Te Po. Hine is generally used only in addressing a young unmarried woman or girl. This therefore is the form of the Virgin Mother. Is that talking about Mother Mary? Literally Virgin Great, the night, the great mother of the underworld, who is seen in the distance opening and shutting moot-like, where the sky and horizon meet. Maui has to pass through her. So Moses, the Hebrew Maui, okay, it's making a comparison, pretty sure of that, entered the mouth of Jehovah, or God. Maui enters the womb of Hine Nui Te Po and is halfway in when the bird Te Waka Waka bursts out laughing at the sight. This woke up the great mother, who was sleeping, and so Maui was crushed to death between her thighs. Maui is called the son of Ra, answering to Shu as the son of Ra. Ra was a tutelary god of Bora Bora. Is that the Javanese, Krakatoa? The title of Ra was made part of the style of kings, and it was as it was in Egypt. In Mangaya, it's a Mangayan, right, the Cook Island region. The rule of each temporal sovereignty was called a Mangaya, or reign of peace, the equivalent of the Egyptian Hept for peace, or Hept for peace, luck and plenty, or in a Koina Ra, a bright shining of the sun. The Egyptian pharaoh was the sun incarnated. The Mangayan Ra was called the man who holds the sun. The pharaoh was the Ha, or later Ra, son of the two houses, Bora Bora. Okay, it's not that Java, Krakatoa. The shrine of the one Ra is equivalent to the double Pa house of the other. The Maori Paru, for the thatch on the roof of the house, renders the Berber Egyptian. The cap top roof in Bora Bora is the equivalent of Para, the house of Ra, duplicated to express the twin heavens. Okay, and goes more into the Mongolian, etc., and the Egyptian. Still not telling us if the Maori originated from Africa. Okay. What's this? Much that is missing in Egypt is recoverable in the Mongolian and Maori treasury of the mythos, or those myths. The transformation, or Kepa, not too sure about that one, also takes place at Kupolu, where dwelt Ma'aru, an old blind man, and his boy named Kationga, bite and smell. English children are still told to bite their bread and smell their cheese. And there's a reference here. At least it was so among the canal boatmen with whom the present writer's childhood was mainly spent. He dwelt with them, right? Spent time with them. The old man, when dying, tells his son to drag his body. When dead, to nikau. The noke, Maori, is an earthworm, and covers it with leaves and grass. Okay, all this sort of stuff. Here the old blind man is one with the blind Kak of Egypt and Kaish, blind man of Britain, both being representative of the sun in the dark and so forth. The pig was the type of sacrifice in Egypt, and in the May festivities of the year 1852, 1,000 pigs were killed in Rarotonga. There's a reference here. The old blind man turning into worms, or kaku, is the god Kak, or Hak, the sun in the lower world, and the sacrifice of the pig was the same in Polynesia as in Egypt. Herodotus, it's a Greek historian, remarked that a tradition is related by the Egyptians respecting this matter, giving an account why they abhor swine at all other festivals and sacrifice them in that the festival of Bacchus. But it is more becoming for me, though I know it not to mention it. And goes on. Yeah, this Bacchus was like a king, or else it's a Greek writer. I'm pretty sure it was a king. I'm not too sure about that Exodus, but in the book of Tacitus, he mentions Bacchus, like the Israelites were welcomed into Egypt and they started multiplying, all that sort of stuff. They were noisemakers, apparently. Maybe they were like the Assyrians and not the actual Jews, Israelites, going up and down at night, early morning with their chariots, making noise, all that sort of stuff. And their stock was like probably rams, goats, sheep, and pigs, right? And the Egyptians hated pigs. They couldn't stand pigs. They couldn't understand why these people had them in their house. Their dirty, poop eating, rolling in animal, all that sort of stuff. They eat their own stuff, right? Their own bile or whatever. And they couldn't understand it. Egyptians couldn't understand it. And apparently a plague broke out. They called it boo-boo, something like that in the Egyptian. And the Egyptian oracles says, look, to this king, you got to get your people out of here, get those people out of here, because if that plague spreads, your people are going to catch it and they're going to die, right? So kick these people out. So that's what he did. Kicked them out, according to the historical books of Tacitus, possibly the Book of Histories. Okay, yeah, and that's why these modern Jews really don't eat pig or pork, because it had leprosy or the plague, boo-boo, whatever it was in Egyptian. Okay. Okay, there's more here. Okay, goes on about the Maori, the Samoans and the Raros and what they do with the pig, and then the Egyptian. And so forth. Okay, so we're going to leave that there and look at it extensively in part 2.